Most of my viewers are probably familiar with the Fabergé eggs. They show up pretty regularly in popular culture as parts of treasures. They conjure up images of magnificent golden eggs that are adorned with diamonds and rubies. The eggs, which were the product of a single firm, although multiple artists, were almost all given as gifts to just two people: Maria, the wife of Tsar Alexander III, and Alexandra, the wife of the last Tsar, Nicholas II. And these eggs, their creation, their artistry, as well as the fortunes of the House of Fabergé, are intimately tied to that period in Russian history, a testament to a society that was industrializing, all its successes and its weaknesses, and its history that deserves to be remembered.
The House of Fabergé was founded in 1842 by Gustave Fabergé in a basement in St. Petersburg. The family was originally French Huguenots who had fled France for Germany before relocating to Livonia, then a province of the Russian Empire. Rather little is known about the early work of the firm, however, the work seems to have been fairly modest. Most historians agree that the firm's more innovative period began under Gustave's son, Peter Karl. Karl Fabergé was born in 1846 in St. Petersburg and at age 14 moved with the family to Dresden when Gustav retired from the jewelry business. The house of Fabergé remained in the hands of a business partner, Hezekiah Pindon. Karl was educated in Dresden before beginning a grand tour of Europe. With tuition from goldsmiths in Germany, he learned English, attended courses in Paris, and traveled to many of the continent's most famous museums. He apprenticed under the respected jeweler Joseph Friedman in Frankfurt, and in 1864, at the age of 18, moved to St. Petersburg to enter the business under the tutelage of Pindon. He also began unpaid work at the Hermitage Museum. In 1872, he began managing the firm, and in 1881, upon Pindon's death, took over sole responsibility for the company, which then employed about 20 people. Karl had been inspired by the many pieces he had seen throughout Europe, and sought to make the firm more than a dealer in petty jewelry and spectacles, as his son Eugene put it. During the 1870s, he involved the firm in repairing and restoring objects for the Hermitage Museum. Karl later described the ethos of his work. Expensive things interest me little if the value is merely in so many diamonds or pearls. In 1881, he was appointed Master of the Second Guild by his peers, an honor which also marked him as a retailer as well as a craftsman, and also the title of Master Goldsmith. He was joined by his younger brother, Agathon, around the same time. The pair rose to prominence in 1882 as their work attracted the attention of the All-Russian Exhibition of Industry and the Arts in Moscow. It was his work with the Hermitage Museum which had earned him the invitation, restoring ancient Greek and Scythian jewelry. He exhibited copies and original designs based on that work, combining a respect for the simpler jewelry popular among Russian elite with a creativity unusual for Russian makers of the period. English diplomat Frederick Hamilton said of the Russian taste that a stone must be very perfect to satisfy the critical Russian eye, and the ladies preferred unfaceted rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. Fabergé's work, however, drew rave reviews. "Mr. Fabergé opens a new era in the art of jewelry," read a notice in a Russian magazine. The Empress herself, Tsar Alexander III's wife, Maria Fyodorovna, honored Fabergé by buying a pair of cufflinks with the images of cicadas, which, according to ancient Greek belief, bring luck. But this only gave Fabergé a foot in the door. In 1883, at least 5 firms were paid for jewelry by the imperial purse, and Fabergé was paid by far the least. In 1884, the crown denied his request to be called a royal supplier. Everything, however, was about to change. Easter was the most important religious holiday in the era, and it was tradition for people to exchange eggs, with the wealthy often exchanging extravagant ones. Alexander III had given his wife jeweled eggs for Easters past, but 1885 was the first year that Fabergé would provide the egg. It's unclear why Fabergé was chosen. Possibly it was only his turn, but a letter from Alexander's brother, the Grand Duke Vladimir, suggests that the Grand Duke may have chosen Fabergé personally. The egg that Fabergé designed was of fine and intricate workmanship, but went beyond being just a pretty egg. It initially appeared to be a large but normal egg, actually gold-coated with white enamel, with a thin band of gold where the halves met. Inside was a golden yolk, and inside the yolk again a golden hen with rubies for eyes. Inside the hen was a diamond replica of the imperial crown, and a tiny ruby pendant. The design appears to have been based off an egg that the Tsarina Maria knew from her youth. The first hen, or jeweled hen egg, was a massive hit. The royal couple was so pleased that Alexander immediately ordered an egg for the following Easter, and 6 weeks after Easter gave permission to merchant jeweler Karl Fabergé to use the title supplier to the imperial court, with the right to bear the state coat of arms in his shop design. Perhaps the greatest irony of Fabergé's eggs is that Carl Fabergé isn't known to have actually constructed any of the eggs. This first egg was made by Carl's chief jeweler, Erich Kolin. Easter was a special holiday for the Tsar and his family. The Tsar was faced with repeated assassination attempts. He had risen to the throne on the assassination of his own father in 1881. The Tsar's daughter Olga remembered Easter as a busy, happy day. It reflected the truth of an ancient saying of ours, as precious as an egg on Christ's own day. From 1885, the annual Fabergé egg was a central part of the celebration. For the 1886 egg, letters fluttered between the Tsar's office and the workshop about design and material. The second egg, known as the egg with hen in basket, has not survived, but it's described as a golden hen set with rose-cut diamonds, holding a sapphire egg in its beak above a golden and diamond basket. It led to the order of a third egg and the beginning of a tradition. Other eggs from the 1880s included a cherub with a chariot and the third Imperial Egg, only rediscovered in 2014. As the years went on, Fabergé was given considerably more freedom in design, with only 3 rules established: that each one should be egg-shaped, that design should not be repeated, and that each should contain a surprise. No one, not even the Tsar, would know until the egg was delivered. To questions, Fabergé merely responded, "Your Majesty will be content." A Grand Duchess once received the response, "This year, Your Highness, we have square ones." The 1890 egg, the sixth, shows evidence of this greater freedom, covered in a milky pink enamel, which contained a gold screen with 10 mother-of-pearl panels, each with a miniature painting of the palaces where the Tsarina had lived. It's now called the Danish Palace's egg. Fabergé was appointed the appraiser of the imperial cabinet, reflecting the new reality. Carl Fabergé was the royal family's favorite jeweler. Though the eggs had become the most famous part of the Fabergé legacy, the prestige meant that orders for all manner of luxuries came to the firm. Silverware, jewelry, carved animals, and decorative pieces left the workshop at a steady clip. In 1887, Karl opened a branch in Moscow. Russian families began talking not of laying the table, but of setting the Fabergé. Karl maintained quality by approving many of the pieces himself, but had trusted workmasters who oversaw the craftsmen. Over half of the imperial eggs carry the initials of workmaster Mikhail Perkin. Fabergé provided designs, sourced materials, and oversaw marketing, while countless workmen churned out the product. Fabergé's craftsmen specialized their work to an astounding degree. Generally 24-karat gold is considered too soft for decorative pieces, so 14-karat gold, meaning there's 14 parts gold to 10 parts base metal, is used. The gold can be colored depending upon the choice of the base metal. Copper makes red gold, silver makes green, while nickel or palladium makes white, and copper and silver makes yellow. Fabergé's goldsmiths doubled the range, adding blue using arsenic, lilac using zinc, purple using aluminum, and gray using iron. They also pushed the boundaries of enamel work. Applying enamel is incredibly difficult, involving the heating of powdered glass that is fused to the metal surface. Layers and layers of enamel became characteristic of Fabergé's design. Most jewelers used only a handful of colors, but Fabergé eventually offered more than 100 colors. Every morning, Fabergé would tour the workshops, and he was known to sometimes take even nearly finished pieces that he found fault with and smash them with a hammer. "You could do better," he would say. "Start again, and do it right." The designs were artistic and beautiful, but personal too. When Maria's sons left on a global journey in 1891, the egg held a detailed model of the ship that they left on. In 1893, while her youngest son George was dying at a Caucasus lodge from tuberculosis, the egg held a picture of George, along with paintings of the lodge. Of course, the eggs, while unquestionably brilliant works of art, also symbolize the state of the Russian monarchy, both its opulence and its failings. In 1891, famine struck the country, blamed on Alexander's policy of selling grain abroad. Nearly 400,000 people died in the famine, while Fabergé's works became more and more ornate, illustrating the growing detachment of the royals from the rest of the country. Alexander's son Nicholas, when he was engaged to Princess Alix of Hesse, presented her with a Fabergé piece, a 165,000 ruble pearl and diamond necklace. The Tsar and Tsarina gifted her an even more valuable necklace of pearls, each selected by Karl himself. In 1894, shortly after the engagement, Alexander III died of a kidney disease, and Nicholas, 26, became Tsar. He would continue the crown's relationship with Fabergé. Fabergé had his own tragedies in the 1890s. His father died in 1893, and in 1895 his brother Agathon died unexpectedly at only 33. Agathon had been the firm's chief designer. Alexander's death ended up being a boon for Fabergé. Instead of one egg, Nicholas ordered 2, one for his mother and one for his wife. Dowager Empress Maria's carried her initials, along with those of her late husband, and Alexandra's red rosebud egg held an imperial crown and pendant, similar to the first one that Maria had received. Fabergé's eggs grew only more elaborate. The 1900 egg given to Maria is a clock and has a bird that emerges from its top to flap its wings and sing a song.
The 1898 pelican egg opens up to provide images of institutions that were patronized by Marie.
The revolving miniatures egg for Alexandra has an emerald button, which, when pressed, turns the pages of a book inside transparent rock crystal, revealing painted miniatures. Fabergé's enterprise had exploded, employing some 600 people by 1900. That year, he displayed some of his eggs at the Exhibition Universelle in Paris, where it met with acclaim. Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI, where are they now? They said, and themselves replied, in St. Petersburg, for now we call them Fabergé, read one French review. While some did find faults, Fabergé nonetheless burst onto the international scene and was awarded the Knight's Cross of France's Legion d'Honneur. 15 of the eggs were displayed in 1902 in St. Petersburg, the largest public gathering of the eggs for the next 75 years. Fabergé's eggs became famous, and he became the most renowned goldsmith in Europe. But the 1905 revolution led to the October Manifesto, supposedly setting Russia on a path towards democracy. In the 6 months that followed, the government executed 15,000 people. This coincided with the Russo-Japanese War. The eggs for 1904 and 1905 were canceled, though the 1904 eggs had already been made and were given as gifts when Nicholas ordered again in 1906. The firm continued to expand, becoming one of the largest in Russia. They opened a branch in London, as well as new branches in Odessa and Kiev. It employed 1,500 people, and while the eggs were an automatic order from the court, apparently orders for other goods were difficult to attain. And finally, the firm was able to put less effort into lobbying for more orders from the court, as orders from others in Russia's growing industrial class came in droves. The house produced countless items. Especially popular was handsome carvings of people, animals, and flowers, often embellished with precious stones. Elephants and pigs were among the most common, but also miniatures of pets, and flowers set inside vases with quartz water. The British royal family was a major collector of these miniatures and holds over 250 items in the royal collection. Sister of Empress Maria, English Queen Alexandra, was considered Fabergé's great patroness in the West. It spurred interest from other English royalty, including Edward VII, George V, and the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth. Wooden frames, gold and silver boxes, walking sticks, doorbells, and timepieces were all produced by Fabergé. But as the 20th century wore on, revolution in Russia smoldered. The Duma, the elected assembly brought about in 1905, was ineffective. The Bolsheviks grew in power, and the royal family continued to order Fabergé eggs. In 1913, one of the eggs was a celebration of the tricentennial of the Romanov dynasty. Nicholas assured his mother in this period that the people's only sorrow was that they did not see the Tsar often and close enough, displaying his blindness to the growing discontent. His mother complained that despite careening towards catastrophe, the Tsar listens to no one but flatterers, not perceiving or even suspecting what goes on around him. The 1913 egg for Marie was designed by one of only two female Fabergé designers, Alma Peel. It was inspired by ice, with a hollow translucent shell supported by rock crystal that looks like melting ice. Within the translucent shell sit flowers made from hard stone. This egg and another Peel-designed egg, the mosaic egg, are considered among the best of the Fabergé masterpieces. 1914 saw the declarations of war that spiraled into World War I. Orders at his factories came to a sudden and dramatic stop, and Carl Fabergé asked how his factories might be turned to help the war effort, only to receive no response for over a year. Russia was able to provide its units with sufficient uniforms or guns, but despite that, they still ordered eggs from Fabergé in 1915, though at a much reduced cost. Much simpler than earlier designs, both carried an image of a Red Cross, as the Tsarina and the Empress Dowager were deeply involved in the Red Cross organization. Two of Alexandra's daughters served as Red Cross nurses. 1915 saw a massive German offensive which overran huge parts of the empire and killed more than 1 million soldiers. By the end of the war, 10% of Russia's population would be called up to serve. Fabergé begged that 23 men from his workshops be exempted. Fabergé also began producing hand grenades and artillery casings. Still, eggs were ordered and duly produced in 1916, both with military themes. Russia's government by 1916 was foundering. Ministers were replaced one after the other, and confidence in the Tsar nearly vanished. It became clear that Nicholas would be deposed, though not precisely how or by whom. Karl himself was under surveillance by the state police. He began to prepare for what seemed to be an inevitable cataclysm. The revolution began in 1917 with peasants in Petrograd, and then the Petrograd garrison mutinied. On March 15, 1917, Nicholas II abdicated. Of course, this was only the opening act in a long play that led to the establishment of Soviet Russia and the death of the Tsar and his family. In the interim, Fabergé actually continued to produce jewelry as wealthier Russians sought to turn their wealth into something more easily portable. No eggs were produced for 1917, although one was partially completed and designs exist for the other. The October Revolution was not good news for Fabergé, a symbol of opulence. The workshops would be nationalized and then shuttered, and two of Karl's sons were arrested. Karl and several of his children were already out of the country, but his son Agathan, named after his brother, was arrested and kept in Russia until he escaped in 1926. Karl himself died in Switzerland in 1920.
Fabergé's eggs were seized by the government, but in the years that followed, many went missing. Some escaped with the Dowager Empress, others were sold into private collections. Of the 52 Imperial eggs, most have been recovered, 46 of them, and they've been put on display at various times, but 6 remain missing. And of course, there were a few eggs made for other people that also still exist. 2 of Karl's sons opened another shop and continued to produce, perhaps less famously so, under the name Fabergé AC. In 2007, the Rothschild egg, a clock made from a Fabergé egg, sold for $16.6 million, making it the most valuable Russian object ever to have been auctioned. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, many of the eggs have been repatriated, and 23 are on display in Russia. They remained broadly appreciated for their craftsmanship and their beauty, symbols of the Russian monarchy, but also symbols of the House of Romanov and their fall, both beautiful and tragic. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.